So some of you may have been wondering what's going on with the Bugatti. Well, I've had it started a couple of times. And in the process of setting up my throttle control to allow me to not only shut the engine off, but engage and disengage the centrifugal clutch, I've had to restart it a few times, and in the process of doing that, I realized my starter mount just wasn't up to the job. So I've had to design and 3D print a mount for the starter, and I finally finished getting it installed, and I had to remove the exhaust to do that, so I figured now would be a good time to give you a little glimpse inside. There is the starter screwed into the new mount that I 3D printed. So now that that's back together, I can put the exhaust back together and start buttoning things back up. Well, I've got it in this position. I thought I'd give you a little peek inside. When I first started this project, like 20 plus years ago, I was determined to make this thing as close to Bugatti's design as possible. So everything I've included in this plane was as close as I could model it to Bugatti's design. Starting with the tail wheel. The Bugatti was designed with a non-steerable tail wheel. This plane is meant to go fast. Everything is aerodynamic as much as possible. The contra-rotating props theoretically should take care of any adverse yaw on takeoff. That'll be the first thing I'm looking for when I start doing my taxi test. The original Bugatti was grabbing the air with the leading edges of the stabilizers from the prop wash and the plane flying and using it to cool the two engines inside the fuselage. Engines are located where these exhaust stubs are on the real plane and over here on the other side, which, by the way, is the main reason why this plane is rarely modeled, because the real plane had the mass of the engines back here in the fuselage. And when you try and adapt that to an RC plane, the engine is up here in the front. So now you have a center of gravity problem. I've tried to do what I can to adapt for that, as well as my engine being placed further back because of the gearbox in front. Is this going to make it flyable? Who knows? It's all experimental at this point, right? Okay, so the cooling through the leading edges of the stabilizers went back to a radiator that was cooling the two engines inside the fuselage. And then the hot air was exhausted out through these vents. I've tried to recreate this using a vortex tube. This is the vortex tube. It's designed to take compressed air, create very cold air out one end of the vortex tube, which would be this end, and the other end, of course, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The hot air goes out this end, which is actually very close to where my vents are. So both of these clear tubes, this one, you can't see this one down here, and this one here are coming from the stabilizers. Those two clear tubes are being forced into this one small manifold here, this white manifold, and then crammed into the vortex tube. This is a aluminum vortex tube that only has a minimum requirement of 30 psi. Is that set up enough to create 30 psi? Who knows? This whole thing's experimental, right? Right. All right, so that's how the cooling is going to take care of the engine. I got this tube in here. The cooling air is going up front and then splitting into a Y and blowing right on the cylinder head. All right, and here you see I got my receiver in there, and this is controls for the stabilizers or the elevators. All right. The silicone tube, this of course is coming from the muffler. It's going all the way back here to these exhaust stubs that are pointing out through the fuselage. The original Bugatti was designed to have the air flowing through the fuselage, actually flowing through the fuselage. This being one of the intakes, this another intake. And then exiting out through the vents. Well, my vents are also operational. These scoops are also going into the fuselage, and they're pushing air through the fuselage. However, the engine is in front of all that. So that's where my cooling tubes, which you can't see very well, are going to cool the engine, hopefully. Is it going to work? Who knows? It's experimental, right? There you can see one way. There's the tip of it right there. It's going to be blowing right on the engine head. All right. Halfway into this project, it became commercially available to get a contra-rotating electric setup. And I thought at the time, I almost gave up because I wasn't going to prove anything. But I realized that really the whole thing to me was about the sound. I want to hear it. This thing needs to roar. This is a race plane. This thing was built to set the land speed record. It needs to roar. All right. So I continued on with the project for that purpose only. My whole dream behind this whole thing is to hear this thing go past me. I want to hear the Doppler effect of this thing going past me on the first high-speed pass, and I'll be a happy man. That's all I want to hear. That's all I want to achieve. Anything that happens after that's just icing on the cake. So there you go. There's a peek inside. That's what she's all about. Hopefully, taxi test this weekend.